Welcome, I'm playing Minecraft today. Before we begin with the stories, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. Let's start with a story that feels steady enough to build to, the night I learned how a small ritual can hold a messy building together. I worked the late desk shift in a campus arts hall, the one with creaky stages, dusty light rigs, and a vending machine that sounded like it ate coins for sport. Finals week turned the hall into a maze of half-finished set pieces and sleepwalking students dragging foam swords past rehearsal rooms. The place had a heartbeat at night, uneven, but there. On my third shift, a woman in a blue scarf brushed in at midnight with a paper bag and a nod. She didn't speak. She walked past the flyer board, cut left at the service corridor, and disappeared toward backstage like she belonged there. Nobody told me about her, nobody needed to. At 12:30, a trio of sound techs shuffled to the desk, eyes red, asking if the kettle ever worked. I didn't even know we had a kettle. Then I remembered the blue scarf and went looking. Back corridor, third door, storage closet with props do not move, scrawled on masking tape. Behind a stack of fake tombstones sat a little electric kettle, a tin of tea bags, paper cups, and a handwritten card. Heat water, breathe for 3, share without talking. I boiled water, poured 3 cups, and handed them across like contraband calm. Nobody made a speech. Everyone drank and breathed and walked away upright. That became the rhythm. Midnight. Someone in a blue scarf. 12:10. Kettle hum. 12:30. The gentle parade of tired humans who needed warmth more than words. I started wiping the counter, replacing cups, keeping the tin stocked. I still struggled to stay alert, so I made a rule for myself. Every top of the hour, I'd stand, stretch, and walk one lap of the ground floor, picking up programs and tuning the world by an inch. The building fought back with sticky doors and stubborn lights, but inch by inch, it listened. On Thursday, a guy in a paint-splattered hoodie showed up wrecked. His set piece had collapsed, and his team was looking at him like he kicked a pillar. He didn't want advice, he wanted not to quit. I handed him tea and a spare roll of painter's tape I'd pocketed on lap duty. He laughed like, "Of course you'd have tape." 10 minutes later he returned, pressed a silver washer into my palm. "Good luck charm," he said, "found it under the rig, probably older than both of us." I kept it in the desk drawer where the pens jam and the batteries pretend to be fresh. Around 2, I finally asked the custodial lead about the blue scarf. He smiled like he'd been waiting. "She's an alum," he said. "Runs a bakery now. During her thesis, she kept burning out, so she set up a quiet tea spot for her team. When she graduated, she promised she'd keep the kettle going for the next stressed-out crew if she ever had time." The paper bag? Usually cookies. Unmarked, dropped in the prop closet so people wouldn't crowd the desk. Keep it small, keep it kind, keep it moving. Friday night came heavy and loud. A thunderstorm rolled in, tripping the lobby power and sending stage kids into flashlight mode. I lined the stairwell with battery candles from the props cage like a low-budget runway. It was ridiculous, and it calmed everyone anyway. Midnight came and went without blue scarf. I felt the washer in my pocket and decided that counted. At 12:10, I took the corridor myself, opened the closet, and there it was. Kettle, tin, and a folded card. "If I miss a night, be the hands. The ritual matters more than the person," it read in tidy felt tip. I filled the kettle, set out cups, and wrote "Tea lives here" on a scrap of gaffer tape. When the power snapped back, the building exhaled. People drifted through for tea that had no official source. Nobody asked. They just cupped the heat, stared at the floor, and returned to their chaos a little softer. Near 2, footsteps hurried up. Blue scarf, soaked, hair stuck to her cheeks, apologizing with her hands because her voice had nothing left. I held up the note and the kettle like we were co-conspirators. She smiled, set down a bakery bag, and sank onto the carpet by the trophy case like someone finally off duty. We split a cookie that tasted like cinnamon and relief. We didn't talk much. She told me her bakery opened at 5, so some nights she couldn't stay. I told her the building had been weirdly calm, like a cat that decided to trust you for one evening. She laughed and said that was the kettle's real magic, giving people an excuse to pause together without pretending they weren't drowning. When she finally left, she tapped the drawer where the washer lived and said, "Lucky metal likes to work." I'm not sure what that meant, but it felt like a blessing. When my shift ended, I left a map for the next desk person, arrows to the kettle, a dot for spare cups, a circle around the only outlet that didn't complain. "Midnight ritual lives in the props closet," I wrote. "If you're tired, you're invited." The washer rattled as I shut the drawer, a reminder that small objects can carry whole nights. I never learned her name. Didn't need to. We kept the ritual. The building kept its heartbeat, and finals week didn't win. If you're stacking blocks right now, try a ritual like that. Place 10, breathe for 3, name the next 2 moves out loud, torch the left wall, slope the stair, then walk away for water. Keep the world tuned by an inch, nothing flashy, just enough to make the room listen. And if you ever pass a kettle someone left for you, you already know what to do. Heat water, breathe for 3, share without talking. That's how long nights become doable, and doable is the beginning of done. Small cues, calmer rooms, better nights together. Slide into the next one, same vibe as the kettle, different setting. A neighborhood laundromat that taught me how a tiny rule can flip a room without anyone raising their voice. The place sits under a dented awning that reads Spin City in peeling blue. Inside, 20 mismatched machines thud like slow drums, and the air smells like soap and coins. I started going at odd hours to dodge crowds, headphones on, folding like it counted as meditation. Problem was, certain folks treated the triple load washers like personal storage. They'd start a cycle, vanish for an hour, and leave a constellation of baskets colonizing the folding table. People got tense. Notes appeared, polite, angry, weirdly poetic. Nothing changed. One Wednesday at midnight, the clerk, a calm guy named June, with a barcode tattoo on his wrist, brought out a corkboard and a Sharpie. He pinned a sheet labeled Spin Q with 6 lines and a box of tiny clothespins. "Heard you?" he said to the room. "Let's try using this before we turn into a soap opera." The rule was simple. If all the triples were taken, you clipped a pin with your name to the next free slot and set a timer on your phone. When your pin hit the top, the next available machine was yours. No arguments, no leapfrogging sweaty baskets. Jun placed a small analog timer on the counter that dinged like a bicycle bell. It felt old school and weirdly official. The first night, people side-eyed it. By Friday, the clothespins looked like a tiny parade. The energy shifted from "don't you dare" to "I see you next." Even the guy who used to sprawl across the table with his football podcasts started clipping in like it was the only logical path through the evening. June added a second piece to the system. A magnetic strip labeled Lost Found, where single socks hung like tiny flags with the hour they were discovered written in dry erase. At closing, he'd match as many as he could, then sweep the survivors into a basket called The Lonely Few. People laughed every time he said the name. Laughter and structure travel well together. I met a kid there who studied late like I did. She'd bring her notes and sit on the floor by the soda machine because the hum helped her focus. She wrote her name, Ria, on a blue pin and drew a tiny comment on the wood. We didn't talk much. We nodded and traded the timer back and forth like passing a baton. After a while, we started leaving each other tiny markers of progress. Sticky notes that said, 1 more page or 1 more basket. Non-binding, completely optional. Surprisingly heavy. 2 weeks in, a man stormed in at 1 a.m., threw open all the washer lids, and yelled that someone had stolen his slot. Jun looked at the board, looked at the guy's empty hands, and tapped the rule. Clip, then claim. The man said he'd been coming for years. June nodded. "Cool, now we share." He slid a clean clothespin forward without flinching. The man took it like it was a dare. He clipped. He waited. When his turn came, he loaded in silence, then put a stray sock on the Lost Found strip without being asked. That was the moment the room exhaled. No victory speech, just a sequence followed by a tiny act of service. On a rainy night, the awning leaked directly onto the folding table. A dark oval of water grew until the clean towels were in danger. Ria grabbed a plastic bin, flipped it upside down as a shield, and scribbled a sign, "Dry zone, fold here." I mopped the table and pulled the bin forward every time the drip moved. June came out with a roll of tape and a square of tarp and MacGyvered a path for the water into a bucket. 20 minutes later, the leak had a system. The room went back to its ritual heartbeat. Timers, dings, pins sliding forward. I had a hoodie with a frayed cuff that I kept fixing and breaking again. One night I threaded a red string through the cuff and tied it off with a neat square knot, telling myself I'd keep it as a reminder to slow down. During the dry cycle, I fell asleep in the plastic chair by the window, dreamt the machines were engines on a ship, and woke to find one sleeve caught in the drum vent. Red string gone, cuff freer than it deserved to be. I stared at the Lost Found strip like it might sprout a miracle. It did, just not that night. A week later, Ria held up a red string clipped to a tiny pin. "Yours?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled and pocketed it. "Borrowed," she said. "Lucky thread. I've got a midterm." I laughed, told her to keep it until she didn't need it. She tucked it into the spiral of her notebook like a bookmark for a page she hadn't reached yet. That night, I wrote, "Next, finish the dark load, then read," on a post-it and stuck it inside my wallet. Breadcrumbs for focus, right where my mind tried to escape. Spring rolled in and the awning got fixed, but the system stayed. The board got wiped clean every week, yet somehow the names kept coming back in the same loops. People who learned to share space simply because the room gave them a decent script. I watched a grandfather teach his grandson to clip a pin and set the little timer. and the kid took it as seriously as a science experiment. He also matched socks with the care of a museum curator, narrating each discovery under his breath. Blue stripe finds blue stripe. Happy reunion. June pretended not to smile and then absolutely smiled. One slow night, I asked June why he bothered with the board when he could just enforce the rules. He shrugged and said, "Rules teach compliance. Rituals teach culture. Culture sticks around when I clock out." Then he rang up a box of dryer sheets and left a free sample on the counter with a handwritten, "Good job today." He rotated among regulars. It was corny. It worked. Something about being gently seen makes a person fold a little neater and wipe the lint trap without being reminded. Ria aced the midterm. She returned the red string without ceremony, tucked into a small envelope with a stick figure comet drawn on the flap. "Lucky thread did its job," she said. I rethreaded the cuff and tied the knot tighter, thinking about how focus is mostly a series of small ties that keep your day from unraveling. If you're building while this plays, steal the laundromat script. Make a tiny queue for your tasks, a list by your keyboard or a sign by your storage wall. Clip your version of a clothespin next to the next thing and let a timer ding you forward. Match the socks of your base. Put lonely items where they can be found, even if nobody thanks you. You'll feel the room shift, you'll feel yourself shift. And when a leak happens, give it a path and keep folding. Next one drifts a little quieter. Library basement quiet. The kind of story that starts with dust and ends with a room breathing easier. I signed up for weekend volunteer hours at the public library because the poster said help us scan history, and I'm a sucker for old paper. They sent me downstairs to special collections, a concrete room with a hum, a single window at ankle height, and a table stacked with bound newspapers from the 70s. Every box had the same label in pencil, local. Every box had a smell like rain and attic. The work was simple. Carefully unfold, flatten with acrylic weights, photograph with a rig that clicked like a patient woodpecker, file by date, repeat. The first hour, I hovered over the rig like I'd shatter history. The second, I learned the paper was stronger than it looked. By the third, I noticed a different kind of pattern. Tiny tears, where people always turned pages, notes penciled along margins where a headline touched a nerve, and coffee rings that felt like timestamps from lives I would never know. A custodian named Malik came in every Saturday with a quiet walk and a key ring that jingled like a melody. One morning he set a small mason jar on the shelf with a taped label, "Found words." "If a phrase jumps out, save it," he said. "Someday we'll make something with it." I thought it was corny until I started seeing them. I dropped them in the jar and felt the room get lighter by a gram. Not everything was romantic. The scanner software froze when it felt like it, and the camera loved to tilt a hair to the left. I wrote a fix list on a yellow legal pad and taped it to the cabinet. Check level, breathe, reseat cable, reopen app, do not panic. I kept a mechanical pencil in the rig's shadow so my future self could find it without looking. On week 3, I opened a bound volume and found a library card slipped at the spine, thin and brittle, stamped 1993. The name in blue pen read Evelyn H., and underneath a phone number that looked almost like mine, except the middle 3 digits were 555, which felt like a joke. I put the card aside, scanned the paper, and felt the urge to do the wrong thing, pocket the relic because it was story-shaped. Instead, I took a photo and slid the card into an envelope labeled "Return to Desk." I told the jar, "Found word," almost. It just waited. A week later, a woman in a green coat came down the stairs with a careful smile and a tote bag that said, "Read harder." She introduced herself as Evelyn's daughter. Her mom had passed away. They were downsizing, sorting, finding, deciding. She heard there might be a card with her name, and would it be okay to see it? I handed her the envelope. She touched the edges the way people touch photographs in movies. Then she laughed and pointed at the scribble in the corner. "That's my mom," she said. "She put her number on everything. She used to say, if something wants to come home, it needs directions." We stood in the concrete quiet for a moment that felt like it hummed. Evelyn's daughter asked if she could leave something for the jar. She tore a strip from a receipt and wrote, "Keep a light on, I might be late." Malik found it at closing and smiled like he'd won a small bet. At the end of the day, he read the jar like a fortune teller and stuck one phrase on the corkboard by the stairs under a heading he'd written in block letters, "Soft News." Soft news turned into a ritual. Every Saturday, one line climbed the cork. Lost dog sleeps outside band room. Teacher hums while grading. Pie contest ends in friendship. People started pausing halfway down the stairs to read them, shoulders dropping a notch without understanding why. Not all of Special Collections was paper. There were weird objects. A centennial spoon, a high school championship pin, a matchbook from a diner that wasn't around anymore, We had to photograph those too, one angle, then another, tiny reflectors dancing like pocket mirrors. I kept wiping fingerprints off the acrylic with a cloth that had outlived its softness. One afternoon I was alone with the rig when the fire alarm hiccuped and then went silent, the faulty panel again. In the quiet after, I heard a scraping noise behind the rolling stacks, like a bookcase exhaling. I walked over and found a map case with a stuck drawer. Tug, tug, nothing. I wedged the acrylic weight under the lip and levered like I had any idea what I was doing. The drawer jumped an inch and slid open with the sad satisfaction of an old song. Inside, maps. Hand-drawn street grids from the 40s with notes in red pencil that said things like, Mrs. Tanaka sells the best plums, and shortcut if the creek is low. They weren't official. They were beautiful. We scanned them. We labeled them. Evelyn's daughter came back and traced her finger along a corner where her mom had once lived. We wrote Plum Goose under soft news and watched 3 people laugh on the stairs before they knew why. The head librarian visited the basement the following week and saw the jar, the corkboard, the rig, the map drawer that now cooperated like a reformed rebel. She said the upstairs reading room had been too loud lately, and would we be open to a tiny experiment, a night window on Fridays when the basement stayed open for quiet reading only? Malik said yes before she could finish the sentence. I nodded because you don't say no to a room asking to be itself. Friday night came and the basement glowed like a low ember. A handful of people brought novels and laptops and sat at the big table without pretending they weren't together. I put a bowl of earplugs on the shelf and a stack of blank cards next to the jar. The rig clicked like a faraway metronome while a kid in a denim jacket read a comic with his head on his backpack. Soft news for that night. Window open, everyone breathing. At closing we turned off the fluorescents and left the lamp by the jar on purpose. Keep a light on, some of us are still late. If you're building while this plays, borrow the basement's moves. Make a fixed list you can see. Save the found words that keep you going. Open a tiny window for your quiet work and protect it with a simple sign even if you're the only person who reads it. And if you find a stuck drawer, try a careful lever and a patient breath. Some maps don't fold until you ask nicely. Let's change texture, chalk dust and rubber mats, because the next story happened at a small climbing gym that figured out how to turn nerves into momentum. I signed the waiver on a Tuesday when the sky looked like crumpled paper. Inside, pop music bounced off plywood and half the room wore tape on their fingers like badges. The front desk person circled belay class in yellow and said, "Pick a lane, pick a pace." The walls had routes that looked like candy and routes that looked like geometry homework. I picked candy and tried not to overthink where my feet belonged. Problem 1. New people would stand around waiting for partners, feeling like news kids at a lunch table. Problem 2. Regulars unintentionally formed little weather systems, friendly but closed. Problem 3. The ropes desk turned into a traffic jam every hour on the hour. The manager, a woman with a laugh you could hear over the crash pad thumps, posted a sign that said, "Partner board," and rolled out a whiteboard on wheels. There were 3 columns, belay needed, belay available, bouldering buddy. Each card had a magnet and a space for a name and a goal. I wrote first time 5.7, don't drop me on a card, dated it and stuck it under belay needed. By the 3rd session I wasn't thinking about whether I belonged. The board had already answered that in dry erase. My favorite part wasn't the partners, it was the chalk bowl with a spiral of tape that said story swap. If you topped out on a route and wanted to trade a tiny lesson, you wrote it on a card, dropped it in the bowl and took a different one out. Most were practical. Look with your feet, press your hips, rest before the crux. Some were weird gold. Hum the Mission Impossible theme on scary moves. Pretend the hold is a cold slice of pizza you don't want to crush. Nobody checked. Everybody read. One night, a climber froze halfway up a slab, hands flat, feet smearing, eyes doing that thing where they get very wide while the body pretends to be a statue. The whole room went politely quiet. Then Kai called up, steady as a metronome. Breathe in, shift right, heels low, press. She shook her head like the wall had become a referendum on her soul. He repeated himself, same words, same cadence, like he was reading a grocery list. She moved 1 inch, then 2, then she was standing on nothing and everything at once. When she clipped the anchors, the room exhaled. She came down crying and laughing at the exact same time, which is the adult version of recess. She said she'd started climbing after a bad week because the wall was honest. If you listen, it tells you what to fix. She folded a story swap card in half and wrote, "Say the move out loud, then do the move." I pulled a card that said, "If your brain is loud, make the climb small. 2 hands, 2 feet, 1 breath." I kept it in my wallet next to receipts for snacks. The gym had a quiet corner for stretching that somehow kept turning into a shoe graveyard. The manager added a shelf labeled "Park Your Kicks" and a little sand timer that ran for 3 minutes. Rule, Take the stretch mat until the sand runs out, then pass it along. People started rotating without side eye. It was silly and efficient, which is the best combination. Not everything was clean chalk lines. A regular named Blaze, probably not his birth certificate, treated the campus section like a performance. He'd dino past holds and slap the top with a shout, which is cool unless you're 3 feet away and trying not to fall on your own face. One night, he cut in front of a kid and started up the exact problems the kid had been working. The manager didn't scold. She rolled the whiteboard over and wrote in big letters, "Circuit hours, 10 minutes on, then rotate." She handed Blaze a dry erase marker. "Want to lead the timer?" she asked. He blinked, then said yes, because some people need authority like a dog needs a job. Blaze became the rotation captain. The kid got his tries. The room stayed fun. Kai taught me to tie a figure 8 without looking at my hands. I taught myself to sit in the harness when my legs started to buzz and to call lower before my brain wandered. We climbed quiet a lot, which I liked. It felt like building a path in survival while a podcast mumbles along. You're doing a simple thing well, and simple things compound. Halfway through the month, the gym hosted a community night. Food trucks outside, raffle tickets for chalk bags, a little talk on injury prevention that sounded exactly like a concerned aunt. The owner gave out 3 paper crowns to people who helped the room breathe better. One went to a guy who fixed the wobbly bench with a multi-tool and a napkin shim. One went to Kai because she caught a fall smoothly and complimented the climber on the footwork before they could apologize. The third went to a shy woman who made a tiny zine about root grades and tape colors, so newbies didn't have to fake knowing things. She put a stack by the front door with a note, "Take this, then take a deep breath." At closing, I borrowed the vacuum and did a slow pass along the base of the wall because it felt satisfying to see the chalk clouds lift. On the board I wrote, "Goal, lead 1 climb next month. Secondary goal, stop naming holds like pets." Someone added, "Tertiary goal, bring snacks, not just receipts." I shoved the card in my pocket and felt the outline of the story I was actually trying to tell myself. Start small, say the move, do the move. 2 weeks later I arrived to find a new column on the board. Rest Day Club. Rules were simple. If your body felt cooked, you put your name there and did light stretching, cheered for others, or learned knots at the side table. Normalize rest like you normalize chalk. It felt like getting permission to be human written in Expo ink. On my first lead attempt, my hands shook on the 3rd clip. I told Kai, "I can't." She said, "Cool, then take." I sat in the rope like it was a chair built for my exact weight. We counted to 5. I tried again. Clip, shake, breathe. 2 more draws, then anchors. I didn't shout. I just tapped the metal and smiled like I'd finally remembered something I used to know. If you're building while this plays, borrow the gym's tricks. Write your next move on a card. Trade 1 tip with yourself at the end of a session. Rotate your attention like circuit hours. 10 minutes on, then move lanes before the wall becomes static. Say the move out loud, then do the move. And when your brain gets loud, make the climb small. 2 hands, 2 feet, 1 breath. That's not just for walls, that's for long days, messy rooms, and any quiet project that needs a patient rope team. Tilt the camera outdoors for a minute. Dirt under nails, hose hiss, a fence with hand-painted signs, because this story lives at a small community garden stitched between 2 apartment buildings. The plots were rectangles of personality. One had soldiers of kale in straight rows. At the back, a kid had a patch devoted only to pumpkins and experiments, which felt correct. A bulletin board by the gate said, "Watering choir" in pastel chalk, and listed days with little sun and moon icons next to names. I joined in late spring after a winter of staring at screens. I picked herbs and a late lettuce, then wrote my name under Wednesday with a moon. Night watering felt like a chill task. You can hear things at night that daylight drowns. The first night, I met an older neighbor named Mr. Ortega who pruned with the patience of a watchmaker. He hummed old ballads while he trimmed and told me the names of plants like they were old friends he respected but didn't always understand. Tomatoes gossip, he said, peppers plot, beans keep secrets. I believed him because he carried himself like someone who had listened long enough to earn conclusions. The garden had one weakness. The spigot was slow and the timer was finicky, so people would open the line, get distracted, and let the hose run until a small lake formed under the raspberries. Cam solved it with a sand timer clipped to a lanyard. You turned the water and flipped the sand. When it ran out, you moved. She did not call it a rule. She called it a rhythm, which changed everything. Rhythms invite, rules nag. In June, a heat wave flattened everything into a grey sigh. People showed up at odd hours, hats down, cheeks flushed, carrying old laundry jugs filled with water like offerings. We took turns with the hose and made a small game of not drowning the basil. Mr. Ortega started leaving cuttings in labeled yogurt cups with simple notes. Rosemary for roast potatoes, thyme for tea, basil for joy. One evening, a kid biked up and sat on the curb watching the bees like TV. He asked if sunflowers could hear. Cam said no, but then added, they do turn to follow the light, which is a kind of listening. The kid nodded like that matched his private theory of everything. He started bringing his little sister to hunt for ladybugs and write ladybug counts on the chalkboard in bright numbers. July arrived loud. A storm pushed through with the kind of wind that makes trees tell ancient stories. In the morning, we found the fence leaning and a mess of twine where the tomatoes used to be disciplined. We didn't debate. We tied the fence upright, reset stakes, and built a simple trellis line with yarn like a kindergarten project. It worked because we were too tired to overcomplicate it. Cam wrote storm fixes on the board with a doodle of lightning that looked suspiciously like a carrot. 2 days later, Mr. Ortega couldn't find his keys. He'd last used them to open the shed, but the shed was locked again, so the keys had to be somewhere between a coil of hose and a universe. He patted pockets, checked planters, even lifted a flat rock like keys might nap beneath. I started a simple grid search, down one path, back another, because my brain likes being useful at one square at a time. We found nothing except a tiny marble and a broken clothespin. He shrugged and said, maybe they come home like tomatoes do when you stop staring at them. That night, watering under moths, I noticed something glinting at the base of the hose timer. Not keys, just a metal washer with a tiny nick. I pocketed it without thinking, then felt oddly protective of a circle of nothing. Focus sometimes needs a talisman, even a cheap one. I wrapped it in a scrap of tape and stuck it to the inside of my watering can like a secret badge. On Saturday, the garden held a swap. Bring what you have extra of, take what you need. A shy neighbor named Lena brought small envelopes of saved marigold seeds and a sign that said, for your guardian borders. She explained that marigolds aren't actual guards, but they look like they're on duty, which keeps people patient. It made sense in the way metaphors make sense when you're sunwarm and carried by a crowd. Mid-August, Cam announced a midnight bloom watch for a night blooming Sirius a member had rescued from a windowsill years ago. She put a little flashlight next to the pot with a note, wake me when it starts. People stretched tarps, set out folding chairs, brought lemon bars that vanished on contact, and pretended we weren't all just waiting for a plant to be dramatic. Around 11:40 the bud opened like it had been practicing in secret for months. The petals looked like a slow exhale. Nobody actually woke the plant. We just watched and felt weirdly loyal to a flower that would be gone by morning. Near the end of the season, I dumped the shed bin to sort tools and found Mr. Ortega's keys stuck under a split bag of potting soil. They'd probably slid off the shelf in the storm and gone on vacation. I set them on the fence post and waited. He arrived in a fedora like nothing was wrong and laughed when he saw the keys. See, he said, they came home when they felt ready. He clipped them to his belt like a medal. I gave him the washer and told him it had been keeping me honest. He nodded without surprise and said, lucky metal likes to work. I still don't know if that's a saying or just his saying. If you're building while this plays, borrow the garden's patience. Put your tools back in a place that feels like home. Make a rhythm instead of a rule. Flip a sand timer, do a pass, then move on. Share your extra cuttings, literal or not. And if something is lost, search one square at a time, then stop staring and let it wander back. Plants, keys, and focus have that in common. They return to people who don't fuss them to death. Last one for tonight floats a little, the way sound does at a pool after dark, because sometimes the best focus comes with echoes. I picked up extra hours as a lifeguard for a community center that kept the lights low for lap swim on weeknights. The rule board was a monument. No diving in the shallow end, no running, shower before entering, lifeguard has final say. The water was warm enough to make the air smell like a storm that forgot to thunder. Week 1 was simple. Whistle, rotate, scan, repeat. Week 2, I started noticing the rhythm of regulars. The center had a problem. The deck got slick near the benches, and despite the signs, people hustled when their timers were tight. We didn't have budget for matting, so the manager bought a stack of cheap towels and a pack of bright clothespins and rigged a dry zone rack under the clock. If you were mid-laps and needed to cross quickly, you grabbed a towel cape, clipped it on, and walked. It was goofy and somehow effective. I made my own quiet system for the chair. Every 5 minutes I would move one finger along the rail and blink long like a camera shutter. It kept me from zoning out to the rhythm of splashes. When my finger hit the end of the rail, I'd stand, stretch, and scan the opposite diagonal like I was drawing an X across the water. It felt like drawing an invisible map that said, I saw you, I'm still seeing you. One night a storm arrived without asking. A low growl rolled through the roof and the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied like they'd decided to be brave. The radio in the cubby squawked even though no one had touched it. A voice, staticky, said something about a blown transformer and the phrase non-essential outage that made us all feel a little too essential. The manager called upstairs to check emergency lighting, and we kept the lanes moving at an easy pace because calm spreads the way panic does, only quieter. Half an hour later, the doors swung and a woman stepped in carrying a waterproof bag and a face that said, "Today was a lot." She asked if she could swim, then added, "I forgot my cap." I handed her a spare from the lost and found, a red one with a tiny nick, and she smiled like the color had permission in it. She swam slow breaststroke in lane 3 and counted quietly, 1, 2, 3, breathe. On her third lap, she stopped by the wall and made eye contact with me the way people do when they're negotiating with themselves. "I'm here because my doctor said move," she said, catching breath, "but my brain said stay home, so I'm trying to make the space between them smaller." I said, "Pick a rule you can keep." She nodded, pushed off, and did 2 more laps without looking at the clock. When she left, she folded the cap and set it under a pebble on the bench like a marker she'd return to. We had a tiny stereo for aqua classes, a stubborn thing that liked to pick a song and repeat it forever if you didn't supervise. During lap hours, we kept it off, but on storm nights, the room felt like a movie that needed a score. Someone started bringing a small waterproof speaker and playing ambient tracks low enough to feel like a distant fan. No lyrics, just a pulse. It kept conversation down without making anyone feel policed. I kept a notebook at the chair because empty minutes love to get lost. On the cover I wrote pool log in block letters, then added good things seen, because logs feel better when they aren't just complaints. The only time the calm cracked was the night the radio squealed and we lost half the lights. Emergency glow kicked in, green and strange. We cleared the deep lanes and kept people along the window side where we could see every face. The neon goggles kid looked at me, uncertain, and I nodded like I had a pocket of certainty to loan him. He started counting louder. The sound steadied the room like a rope passed hand to hand. When power returned, the whole pool cheered like a stadium. The woman with the red cap laughed through her whole body and did a lazy backstroke victory lap. On her way out, she tapped the cap under the pebble and said, "Leave it for me? I'm coming back Thursday." She raised an eyebrow like she expected me not to believe her. I said, "I'll put your name on it." I wrote R on a piece of tape and stuck it inside. It felt like saving a seat in a quiet theater. Thursday arrived and she did too. She swam 5 laps, then 6, then stood at the wall and pressed her palms down like she was sealing a promise. She said, "My rule is 2 laps, minimum. Anything extra is a bonus." By week's end, her minimum had turned into a habit that didn't ask permission from her head noise. The last week of my shift run, we hosted a night swim with the lights dim and the doors propped to the courtyard. Crickets harmonized with the filters. The coach taught a 15-minute clinic on turns to anyone who drifted close. Malik taped glow sticks to the lane lines so they looked like runways in a gentle sci-fi. People who'd never met paced each other like they were cousins at a family reunion. As we closed, the woman with the red cap returned it to the lost and found. "I bought my own," she said, lifting a new one still smelling like the store. She tucked the red cap into the bin, then paused. "Can I leave a note for whoever borrows this next?" She wrote on a card, "Pick one rule you can keep. 2 laps count." She wedged the card under the cap like a fortune waiting for the right pocket. I sat on the tower for a minute longer than I needed to. The pool was a rectangle of quiet chaos, the kind you can steer with a whistle and a notebook and a towel cape. I thought about the jars and boards and timers from other rooms, the little ways we teach ourselves to stay human when our brains want to sprint. Then I wrote the last line of the night in the log. Everyone got home to themselves. I clicked the light, heard the filter sigh, and let the room go dark in a way that felt earned. If you're building while this plays, take the pool with you. Mark a cap. Save a spot for your future self. Write 1 line after a session so you'll have a breadcrumb tomorrow. Pick a rule you can keep. 2 laps count. 10 blocks count. Small rituals, big calm, easy echoes, enough to carry you to the next save point.